The struggling cowboy found the old black girl buried alive by her stepbrothers on a night when thunder split the sky like judgment itself. Jake Morrison had been riding through the storm, his horse picking careful steps along the muddy trail near Willow Creek when lightning illuminated something that made his blood freeze, a hand, clawing through wet earth. Jake threw himself from his saddle. The dirt was soft from rain, thank God, and he dug with his bare hands until he could pull her free. She was small, maybe 60 years old, her dark skin ashen with near death. Her dress was torn, her hair matted with soil. She gasped once. "Brothers." Then her eyes rolled back. Jake lifted her onto his horse. The abandoned cabin sat a mile upstream, its roof mostly intact. He'd sheltered there before during his wanderings. Tonight it would have to serve as a sanctuary. Inside, he built a fire and laid her on the old wooden bunk. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Jake had seen enough death to recognize life, hanging by a thread. This woman had been buried alive. Someone had meant for her to die slow and afraid. While she slept, he examined her torn clothing for clues. Hidden in the lining of her dress, sewn with careful stitches, was a folded paper. Jake spread it near the firelight. A land deed. Property along the western ridge. Oil-rich land, if the rumors were true. Worth more money than Jake had seen in 10 years of cowboying. The woman stirred. Her eyes opened, sharp and alert despite her ordeal. "You saved me." Jake nodded. "Who did this to you?" "My stepbrothers, Marcus and Thomas Washington." She struggled to sit up. "I'm Cordelia Washington. That paper you found, it's mine by right." "Your father's land?" "Samuel Washington was my father. White man who acknowledged me in his will." Her voice carried old pain. His sons from his first marriage, they couldn't stomach a black daughter inheriting what they thought was theirs. Jake studied the deed again. The property boundaries were clearly marked, legal and proper. "So they tried to kill you for it?" "They succeeded, far as anyone knows. I'm supposed to be dead." Cordelia's eyes held a hardness that spoke of surviving worse than being buried alive. "But that deed you're holding, it's not the real one." Jake's heart sank. Of course it wasn't. Nothing in his life had ever been that simple. "It's a copy I made. The real deed is hidden, along with other papers that certain people would kill to keep secret." She watched his face carefully. "Papers that prove my father didn't die natural." The fire crackled between them. Outside, the storm was passing, but Jake could feel another kind of tempest building. "Why tell me this?" "Because you pulled me from that grave. Because you're here listening instead of riding away." Cordelia sat up straighter. "And because anyone who knows what I know becomes a target." Jake had been broke for 3 months. His last job ended when the ranch owner sold his cattle and moved back east. He'd been living on coffee and hardtack, sleeping under stars, wondering if he'd ever amount to more than a drifter with empty pockets. Now he held a worthless deed and sat across from a woman whose very existence threatened powerful men. What kind of papers? Letters, bills of sale, records of cattle that were never owned by the men who sold them. Land claims that were jumped and registered under false names. Cordelia's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "My father kept careful records of everything he saw, everything he knew." "About who?" "Men who run this county, men who decide who lives and who dies." Jake felt the weight of choice settling on his shoulders like a heavy coat. He could walk away, leave her the deed, wish her luck, and ride out before dawn. Find another ranch, another job, another chance to scrape together enough money to matter. Or he could stay, help her reclaim what was hers, face whatever came next. "Where are these papers hidden?" Cordelia smiled for the first time since he'd pulled her from the earth. "My father's cabin up in the mountains, place nobody knows about, except me. And your stepbrothers, they'll be looking for you. They think I'm dead, but when my body doesn't turn up, they'll start wondering. Start searching." She stood slowly, testing her strength. "We don't have long before they realize their mistake." Jake folded the false deed and handed it back to her. Through the cabin's single window, he could see the storm clouds breaking apart. Dawn was still hours away, but the sky was already lighter. They'll check here eventually. Yes. And if they find us together, they'll know someone helped you. Yes. Jake stood and kicked dirt over the fire. The embers hissed and died. In the darkness, he made his choice. Then we better get moving. Outside, his horse waited patiently in the drizzle. Jake helped Cordelia mount, then swung up behind her. As they rode away from the cabin, he saw lights moving. In the distance, torches or lanterns heading their way. The hunt had already begun. They rode into Cedar Falls as the morning sun cut through the last of the storm clouds. Jake kept Cordelia steady in the saddle, her weight against his chest, a reminder of how close death had come for her. The town was waking up, smoke rising from chimneys, horses stamping in the livery stable. Dr. Henley's office sat above the general store. Jake had been treated there once for a broken arm. The doc was decent enough if you could pay his fee. Henley took one look at Cordelia and stepped back. His eyes moved from her mud-stained dress to her dark skin to Jake's grim face. What happened to her? Found her by the creek. Looks like she was hurt bad. The doctor's hands were gentle as he examined Cordelia, but Jake saw the questions. In his eyes, a white cowboy bringing in a black woman covered in dirt, the kind of situation that made people talk. Henley cleaned her wounds and checked her breathing. She needs rest, food. Someone tried to hurt her real bad. Will she live? She's stronger than she looks. The doctor glanced at Jake. You paying for this? Jake counted out his last few dollars. Enough for the treatment, not enough for much else. Outside the office, townspeople gathered. Their whispers followed Jake and Cordelia like smoke. He helped her down the stairs, her hand gripping his arm with surprising strength. The hotel wouldn't take them. The boarding house turned them away at the door. Finally, the livery stable owner offered them space in the hayloft for $1. They were settling into the makeshift shelter when the sound of horses filled the street. Jake peered through the loft window and saw 2 men dismounting outside the sheriff's office. Well-dressed, clean-shaven, the kind of men who never got their hands dirty. That's them, Cordelia whispered. Marcus and Thomas. The Washington brothers moved with the confidence of men who owned what they walked on. Marcus was tall and lean, his coat tailored and pressed. Thomas was broader, his face soft from easy living. They carried themselves like wounded animals, talking fast to anyone who would listen. Jake watched them work the crowd, concerned brothers searching for their poor, confused sister. She'd wandered off in the night. Wasn't right in the head since their father died. They were worried sick. The lies came smooth as butter. Sheriff Crawford emerged from his office. A big man with silver hair and a badge polished to mirror brightness. He listened to the brothers with the grave attention of someone used to solving problems. We'll find her, Crawford said. His voice carried across the street. Probably scared and hiding somewhere. We'll bring her home safe. Cordelia's hand found Jake's wrist. Her fingers were cold. He's good at this, she said, making people believe what serves him. The sheriff? Bill Crawford was my father's business partner. They had dealings for years. Her voice was barely audible. When Papa died, Crawford helped settle the estate, made sure everything was handled proper. Jake studied the man below. Crawford looked like law and order made flesh. The kind of sheriff who kept towns peaceful and citizens safe. He's the one who forged the will, Cordelia continued. Split my father's wealth 3 ways instead of giving it all to me like Papa wanted. Crawford, Marcus, and Thomas each got a share. The words hit Jake like cold water. He watched Crawford shake hands with the brothers, saw the easy familiarity between them. You're certain? Papa told me before he died. Said if anything happened to him, I should trust no one in this town. Said Crawford was stealing from him, had been for years. Down in the street, Crawford was organizing a search party. Men with rifles and ropes. The kind of men who asked questions after they found what they were looking for. They can't let you live, Jake said. No, they can't. Crawford's voice drifted up to the loft. He was promising the townspeople that justice would be served, that dangerous elements would be rooted out and dealt with proper. The irony tasted like dust in Jake's mouth. A young deputy approached Crawford with news. Jake strained to hear, caught fragments about tracks near the old cabin, signs of recent use. Crawford nodded and turned to address the growing crowd. "We have reason to believe a drifter may have taken advantage of this poor woman's condition. Someone with no ties to our community, no respect for our values." Jake felt the net tightening around them. Crawford was painting him as the villain in this story. The stranger who'd hurt an innocent woman and fled like a coward. "We need to leave," Jake whispered. Cordelia was watching the scene below with the stillness of someone who'd seen this performance before. "Where can we go? They own this whole county. Your father's mountain cabin, the real papers. It's a day's ride. They'll track us." "Maybe. But staying here means dying here." Crawford was deputizing volunteers now, handing out badges to men who looked eager for the hunt. Marcus and Thomas stood beside him like grieving family members, their faces masks of concern and righteous anger. Jake had seen lynch mobs before, knew how they moved, how they thought. These men weren't looking for justice, they were looking for blood. "Tonight," he told Cordelia, "when the town sleeps." She nodded, her eyes never left Crawford's face. "He was at Papa's funeral," she said. "Gave a speech about what a good man my father was, how much the community would miss him, while planning to steal everything he owned, while knowing he'd killed him." The words hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. Not just theft. Murder. Below them, Crawford's posse was mounting up. They would search every building, every hiding place, every shadow in Cedar Falls. And when they found nothing, they would expand their hunt. The mountains offered their only chance. The hidden cabin and whatever truth lay buried there. Jake checked his rifle and counted his remaining ammunition. 6 bullets. Enough for trouble, not enough for war. Cordelia was gathering her few possessions, moving with the careful efficiency of someone who'd learned to travel light. Her father's blood ran in her veins, but she'd inherited more than land from Samuel Washington. She'd inherited his enemies. The sun was setting when Crawford's men rode out of town. Their torches bobbed like fireflies in the gathering darkness. Soon they would be alone with the night and whatever justice they could carve from it. Jake helped Cordelia down from the loft. Their horse waited in the stable, rested and ready. Time to run toward the truth or die trying to find it. They climbed through pine and stone toward Samuel Washington's hidden cabin. The mountain air was thin and cold, carrying the scent of snow that hadn't yet fallen. Jake's horse picked careful steps along the narrow trail, while Cordelia pointed the way through switchbacks and ravines that seemed carved from memory itself. The cabin sat in a clearing where ancient trees had fallen and never been replaced. Logs chinked with moss and mud, a stone chimney that had seen countless fires, windows that looked out on nothing but wilderness and sky. "Papa built this place before I was born," Cordelia said. "Used to come here when he needed to think." Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight. The furniture was simple but well made. A table, 2 chairs, a bed frame that had been slept in by someone who valued solitude over comfort. Cordelia went to the fireplace and removed 3 stones from the hearth. Behind them was a hollow space lined with oiled cloth. She pulled out a bundle of papers tied with string. "Everything's here. The real deed, Papa's letters, records of every crooked deal Crawford ever made." Jake watched her spread the documents on the table. The real deed was different from the copy they'd found. More land, better water rights, access to the oil seepage that made the property valuable beyond measure. But it was the letters that made Jake's blood run cold. Samuel Washington had written everything down. Dates, names, amounts of money that changed hands in the dark, cattle that disappeared from one ranch and appeared on another, land claims that were jumped and refiled under false names. Crawford's signature appeared on dozens of forged documents. Your father was building a case against him. For years, Papa was careful, patient. He knew Crawford was stealing, but he needed proof. Cordelia's finger traced one of the letters. This one's dated a week before Papa died. He was planning to take everything to the territorial marshal. Jake read over her shoulder. Samuel Washington's handwriting was precise, methodical, the writing of a man who understood that truth required evidence, and evidence required time, but time had run out for Samuel Washington. Crawford poisoned him, Cordelia said. The words were spoken quietly like a prayer or a curse. Papa got sick sudden, couldn't keep food down. Doctor said it was his heart, but Papa was strong as an ox. She pulled out another letter, this one sealed, but never sent. The address was clear. Territorial Marshal, Denver, Colorado. Papa wrote, this the night before he died. Told me if anything happened I should send it, but I was scared. 17 years old and scared of what they'd do to me. So you kept quiet. For 43 years I kept quiet. Let them steal from Papa's grave. Let them get rich off his work. Her hands shook as she held the letter. But when they put me in that grave, something broke open inside me. The sound of horses drifted up from the valley below. Jake moved to the window and saw riders threading through the trees. Crawford's posse had followed their trail. How many? Cordelia asked. 6, maybe 7. She was already gathering the papers, folding them carefully back into their bundle. There's a root cellar behind the cabin. We can hide there. They'll search everywhere, and we can't run forever. Jake studied the approaching riders. Crawford rode in front, his silver badge catching, sunlight like a target. Marcus and Thomas flanked him, their faces grim with purpose. The other men were townspeople Jake recognized. Farmers and shopkeepers turned into hunters by the promise of righteousness. They're going to kill us, Cordelia said. Yes, and bury the truth with our bodies. Jake checked his rifle. 6 bullets for 7 men. The mathematics of survival had never been his strong suit. The riders were close enough now that voices carried on the wind. Crawford's voice, calm and authoritative, directing his men to surround the cabin. No escape routes, no mercy for dangerous fugitives. Jake made his choice. He walked to the cabin door and opened it wide. Sheriff Crawford, he called out. Let's talk. Crawford reined in his horse 50 yards from the cabin. His hand rested on his gun butt, but he hadn't drawn yet. Still playing the role of lawman bringing in criminals. Come out with your hands visible, both of you. I've got something you want to see first. The only thing I want to see is you face down in the dirt. Jake held up the bundle of letters. Even at this distance, Crawford's face changed when he saw them. Samuel Washington's papers. Everything he wrote about you. Crawford's horse danced sideways, sensing its rider's tension. The other men looked confused, unsure what papers meant in a situation that should have been simple arrest and justice. I don't know what you're talking about. Bills of sale for cattle you never owned. Land deeds with your signature forged on them. Letters to the territorial marshal describing every crime you've committed for the past 20 years. The silence stretched like a held breath. Crawford's men were looking at him now, questions forming in their eyes. This man is desperate, Crawford said to his posse. He'll say anything to save his own skin. But his voice carried a tremor. That hadn't been there before. Jake stepped back inside the cabin. Cordelia was waiting by the window, her father's papers clutched against her chest. What are you doing? Buying us time. For what? Jake pulled out a piece of paper from his coat pocket. A letter he'd written by lamplight in the livery stable, addressed to Judge Harrison in the territorial capital. I sent a copy of these papers to the circuit judge yesterday. Gave them to a freight wagon driver heading east. Cordelia stared at him. You did what? Insurance, in case we didn't make it this far. Outside, Crawford was shouting orders to his men. Surround the cabin. No one gets out alive. But Jake could hear uncertainty in the voices that answered. Crawford had made his choice too. He couldn't let them live to tell their story. Couldn't risk the truth reaching Denver. But killing a woman and a cowboy was one thing. Explaining it to a territorial judge was another. The first shot shattered the cabin's front window. Glass scattered across the floor like broken promises. Jake pushed Cordelia toward the root cellar. Get down there. Stay quiet. What about you? Someone needs to make sure those papers survive this. She grabbed his wrist. Her fingers were warm against his skin. Jake, my father died alone. Don't make me watch it happen again. He looked into her eyes and saw 43 years of carrying secrets that weighed more than gold. She'd buried her truth once to stay alive. She wouldn't bury it again. Then we both make it out. Or neither of us does. Another shot punched through the cabin wall. Wood splinters flew like angry wasps. Crawford's voice carried across the clearing, no longer pretending to be anything but what he was, a killer finishing what he'd started decades ago. Bullets splintered the cabin walls like accusations seeking flesh. Jake crouched beside the overturned table. Cordelia pressed against the stone hearth behind him. Crawford's voice carried through, the gunfire no longer the measured tone of lawful authority. Burn them out. The smell of kerosene drifted through the broken windows. Smoke began curling under the door. Crawford had abandoned any pretense of bringing them in alive. Jake counted the shots, 5 men still firing. 2 had gone quiet after his return fire found its mark. His ammunition was nearly spent. Crawford, Jake called out. Judge Harrison's already got copies of those papers. Killing us won't bury the truth. The shooting stopped. In the sudden silence, Jake heard whispered arguments among the posse, doubt creeping into voices that had been certain an hour ago. You're lying, Crawford shouted back. Freight wagon left Cedar Falls yesterday morning. Driver named Coleman. He's got a package addressed to the territorial court. More whispers. The townspeople were realizing they'd been pulled into something larger than finding a missing woman. Boss, one of the men called out, maybe we should talk about this. Shut up, Henderson. This man's a criminal. But what if he's telling the truth about them papers? Jake saw his opening. He grabbed the bundle of Samuel Washington's letters and stepped toward the door. I'm coming out. I want to make a deal. Jake, no. Cordelia's voice was fierce but quiet. Trust me. He opened the door and walked into the clearing. The smoke stung his eyes, but he kept moving until he stood in the open space between the cabin and Crawford's position. Crawford sat his horse like a man who'd run out of choices. His face was flushed, his badge crooked on his vest. The other men watched him with new uncertainty. Here's what's going to happen, Jake said. You let Cordelia walk away. In exchange, I give you these papers and you can shoot me dead. Claim I was resisting arrest. What's to stop her from talking? Who's going to believe her? You're the sheriff. She's a woman with no proof and no witnesses. Crawford considered this. Behind him, Marcus and Thomas Washington were having their own whispered conversation. Jake caught fragments, words like murder and hang and federal marshals. The Washington brothers were finally understanding what they'd gotten themselves into. Of course, Jake continued, there's still the problem of Judge Harrison getting those papers. Even if you kill both of us, he'll still have Samuel Washington's letters, still have evidence of murder and theft. Thomas Washington spurred his horse forward. Crawford, you never said anything about murder. Your stepfather died of natural causes. Did he? Thomas's voice was rising. Because if these papers say different and they get to a federal judge, we're all going to hang. Marcus joined his brother. We signed on to steal some land, not to cover up killing our own father. Crawford's face was the color of old blood. Your father was going to destroy all of us. I did what had to be done. The admission hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Henderson, the farmer who'd questioned Crawford earlier, lowered his rifle. Sheriff, I got a family. I can't be part of no murder conspiracy. 2 other men followed suit. The posse was dissolving like sugar in rain. You're all fools, Crawford snarled. Walk away now and you'll be accessories. Help me finish this and we all keep our mouths shut. But the spell was broken. The men who'd followed him up the mountain were seeing him clearly for the first time. Jake heard horses approaching from The valley below. New riders moving fast. Judge Harrison appeared through the trees, flanked by 2 federal marshals. The circuit judge was a thin man with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen every kind of human failing. "Sheriff Crawford," the judge called out, "I received some interesting correspondence yesterday." Crawford's hand moved toward his gun. Jake tensed, ready to dive for cover. "I wouldn't," one of the marshals said. His badge caught the light like a star. "We've got you surrounded." More riders emerged from the forest. Federal men with rifles and authority that superseded local law. Crawford's shoulders sagged. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured balloon. "Thomas," the judge said. "Marcus, I'll need you both to come with us. There are questions about your father's death." The Washington brothers exchanged glances. Thomas spoke first. "We'll tell you everything. Crawford poisoned Papa, made us help cover it up, promised us shares of the inheritance if we kept quiet. But he kept most of it for himself," Marcus added. "We were just his tools." Crawford dismounted slowly. One of the marshals moved to take his weapon and badge. "Bill Crawford, you're under arrest for the murder of Samuel Washington and conspiracy to commit fraud." Cordelia emerged from the burning cabin, her father's papers still clutched in her hands. She walked to where Crawford stood in shackles. 43 years, she said quietly. 43 years I carried Papa's secrets." Crawford wouldn't meet her eyes. Judge Harrison examined the letters indeed. "Miss Washington, it appears you're the rightful owner of considerable property. The court will see that your inheritance is restored." 6 months later, Jake stood in the cemetery outside Cedar Falls. Samuel Washington's grave now bore a proper headstone, paid for with oil money that flowed like justice too long delayed. Cordelia owned the largest spread in 3 counties. The oil wells brought prosperity to the whole region. She'd used her wealth to build a school where children of all colors learned to read and write. Jake managed her cattle operation and had enough money in the bank to matter. More importantly, he'd found something worth more than gold. Purpose, respect, a future that stretched beyond the next job or the next meal. Crawford died in territorial prison, his crimes finally catching up with him. The Washington brothers served 5 years each, their cooperation earning them lighter sentences than their guilt deserved. The truth had risen from the grave where evil men tried to bury it. Justice had come slow, but sure, like sunrise after the longest night. Jake adjusted his hat and walked toward the schoolhouse where Cordelia was teaching children their letters. Some battles were worth fighting. Some truths were worth dying for. The struggling cowboy had found more than a woman buried alive. He'd found redemption growing in the dark soil of other people's sins. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.